Welcome, welcome. Much changing in the world right now. There are voices and hearts that are speaking words that call for deep listening. And so, inviting you today to just meet this call with deep listening and presence. The man who's speaking today is Shivam O'Brien. Shivam is unlike any being I've ever met in my life. Shivam might be the most audacious human that I've met. He might be the most audacious human that I met 30 years ago. Uh, Something very special began in mid Wales, and Shivam was at the center of that. And 30 years later, that thing is still going, and it's called Spirit Horse now. And there is 200 acres of wild Welsh Valley that has been rewilded in many ways by Shivam and the seasonal community that visits there. Shivam is well, I don't want to put too many labels on you. Maybe you can, don't want to give you too many labels, Shivam. Maybe they can work it out for themselves. But I consider him to be a mentor, someone that I deeply respect, someone that I listen to with all my heart. And and someone who I consider a friend and ally on Earth right now. So I'd like to invite you to give a big silent round of applause to Shivam O'Brien as he lands on the call.
Okay, welcome everyone into this little cabin here. Outside the door, plowman dig my earth, as Dylan put it. The earth is still being torn apart. The farmers are still busy making a buck. Everyone's still trying to get by at the end of our civilization. Everyone knows something has gone wrong. I knew it when I was about 7 years old. I was brought up by Irish peasants who came from their farmlands to live in inner city Birmingham. And when I saw the cars whizzing around that huge and great town, and a friendly, good, beautiful town, beautiful city, but nevertheless, it was at the heart of a thing called the Industrial Revolution, which followed a few thousand years after the Agricultural Revolution. I knew that something had gone wrong. I didn't know what it was. And later on, when you become a teenager and you have to self-initiate one way or another, mine was to try and find real people in books, because I never met any in the flesh, not back in 1960-something and 1970-something. Somewhere to seek a brother or a mentor or a grandfather or somebody wise who would say something that was really meaningful. All I knew at that time, at that young age, was that I don't want to join in. I don't want to join in with what's going on at all. I was young. I thought, I don't want a car. I don't want to drive around. I don't want a job. And I did eventually end up with a car, but I didn't end up with a job. I managed to avoid that one. Instead, had to invent something that I thought was worth doing. So I knew something was wrong and something had been lost. But like most of us in our civilization now, which has become the dominant civilization over just about every corner of the globe, if there was somewhere that didn't, that hadn't been polluted or diseased by our culture yet, we'd probably want to get a plane and go there and just to hang out with those beautiful people somewhere still at home in their beautiful place without having trashed it. But even if we did find them, there'd be somebody just around the corner making a move on it, usually to make a fast buck, whether it's with the, shaking hands with a government or a corporation or somebody else who's holding the power right now. Just like the tractors are plowing around here. Our field over there has been dedicated forever. Now we set up this charity and so forth, but where we came originally with the first few teepees of Spirit Horse, somehow miraculously, through my own little rebellion, through seeking to do something in answer to all these things that seem so wrong to me, somehow or other a little tiny civilization of our own started up. To cut a long story short, so that on one side of the fence, the trees are allowed to grow wild and people celebrate that. The wildflowers are returning and people celebrate that. The wildness of letting the kids run around free from time to time, the wildness of letting young people find some kind of different tribal home, whether it's to the sound of the drum or the sound of a story or the just plain living with some verve and style in the open air without having to deal with doorways or fences. Some taste of the wild. It's happening on one side of the fence, on the other side, it's business as usual. At an early age, I felt that something was wrong. And later, when I grew up and went to English grammar school, where I was educated or miseducated, leaving at 16, I knew it was something to do with language. It was the way the world was being talked about, which is the way the world was being looked at. And there was this initiatory process, and they tried to force me into it. Most of us have been pushed through it. A mill where you're sent to school to learn how to deliver with disinterest on every subject that's presented to you. Write an essay on this. It's a load of boring crap, but you will go home taking this in your mind. You write an essay and hand it into Sir the next day. I did at school learn a few interesting things. I hated one subject above all those, which was Latin, but it did teach me something about the roots of language. And it's good to learn the language of the conqueror. Latin, English, other such languages. So when you do get around to striking back, you know very well your enemy. But let me go back to that point. Something was wrong. We feel it as a child. We feel it as a teenager. How many young males, how many young females don't feel it? Something's wrong. Is it the system? Is it the government? Is it the country? Or is it just mom and dad? Whatever it is, you want to strike out and find your own way. What you would love to do is to find a mentor. What you would love to do is to receive a blessing, to get around to the subject I'm going to address of speech. That blessing does not happen. That blessing did not happen to me. Not once, ever. Somebody took me aside for about 1 minute once, famous kind of hippie painter, and said something in my ear about taking life easy. He was the only one. And I was actively out there seeking. I left school and I was looking for the adventure, looking for my own initiation, went to India as an 18-year-old, traveled overland, went to Afghanistan, all those wild things. That was my journey. And one person on a bus on the way back from India and Afghanistan who said 2 or 3 words that kind of hinted, he was an Indian guy, going to try and make a few quid for his family in Iran, that said just a few words in my ear that could possibly have been a blessing. And those are the only words I ever heard in my entire youth. This is one aspect, let's leave it over there for a moment. If I get time, I'll go back to it, of the words that you need to hear, that if you don't hear, then your body, psychic system, spirituality, emotional authenticity and everything will be starving and will not learn to grow up, but will learn maybe to be angry, to lash out, that there will be a poverty of the soul. There'll be generations and many generations missing from your adventure because you've been making it up as you go along yourself. You won't trust the tradition. You won't trust history. You won't be able to connect with ancestry, and you will be at war with a world that has gone crazy. That would be natural. That would be normal. That would be what you should be doing if you're an unblessed youth. So that's how I started out. Things have changed around a little bit. There might be a little bit more hope. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with our education system. Something was wrong with our civilization. I could see as a child, now I've got much more of the facts and figures, all not a big one for the numbers, that the world is being torn apart. We don't know, or many of us have yet to find out, where did it go wrong? Where did our civilization go off the rails? Was it at the Industrial Revolution? Was it somewhere else? Where did was the military industrial thing? Where did it go wrong? At school, we're taught to speak a certain language, which is a language of efficiency and delivery and aloofness and ideas, not the language of blood, axe, and stone and contact with the earth, the language of ideas, concepts, control, administration, the language used nowadays by the administration of governments and military, economics, the real world. If we were honest enough, if we labored over it enough to see where our civilization had gone wrong, we would then, after we've wept, after we've been broken, after we realize that we are become the enemy of the earth, that we're part of a machine that's tearing the earth apart, we would then go to people who don't do that and kneel in front of them and ask them, can you tell us about your way of life? Could you tell us, how did you live here for thousands of years without destroying anything? We will have to start looking, and we do need to do now, to look at the roots of culture. One, our own, where it went wrong, and then to heal it, somewhere else where maybe that hasn't happened. So much to say. Could we look to our own Celtic roots in this culture here? Many people say, "Oh, let's go into that. Let's go into our own ancestry." Too long ago, too much damage done, too many generations lost, too many generations of unblessed people, too many generations removed from the land since the last person really spoke the holy words of blessing from elders to young, but also from the elders to the land, to the sea, to the rock, to the water, to the forest, to the flowers, to the other beings that we share the world with. Once upon a time, people spoke to the trees or to the birds or to the animals. The fairy tales can start like that. Once upon a time, in the old indigenous root, if we were to go back far enough into the storyline where the treasure is to be found, if we go back into those matrilineal cultures, if we go back to the pre-industrial, pre-agricultural stories, back to the hunter-gatherer, which some people want to dismiss as that we can't go back there. Yes, we can go back there in leaps and bounds and forays and searchings and prayerfully look and see where were we for the first million years of humanity before we arrived at this edge, this disaster, this brink, and see what stories people had. The stories have a way of surviving, and that would be a connection to a root that's different to our own. One culture has come to dominate the whole world. Our culture, we call it, for most of us listening here and the speaker, it's our culture, the culture we were brought up in. It's given us all kinds of luxury, it's given us some kind of privilege, but it has destroyed the world, and it's killing more, and it cannot be allowed to continue for another generation. So, not to paint too strong a picture on that, but to get that, as most of you probably have, and to find out what's wrong. And if we were to look at language alone, we might get near to it. But to look at the language that can be used now, everything's in translation. Everything's available from all over the world. So we can look at what somebody in ancient Americas was maybe talking about. Something has been preserved. Our own European traditions, Russian, Icelandic, African, Asian. And at Spearhorse, you've tried to take a little tiny piece from here, there, or wherever something intact could be found. Can just be a sentence sometimes. It can just be the way something is spoken of that brings us back to a place where we were not separate, where before we had our schooling, before we had our industrial wasteland, before we had efficiency, which is destroying the world, before we had administrations, before people were enslaved into those roles, and find out how people spoke, how they lived, what words they used, and most importantly, what stories they were nourished with. How were children brought into adulthood? How were adults part of the natural world? How people could hunt, kill other animals, and maintain a respectful relationship. Those things are encapsulated in story. And story is not an information bank. Story is the most beautiful way that a culture can be held, and its simplicity, its pared downness, it's always what seems to be flowery beauty, but actually it's an essential, necessary, bare beauty. Not one word extra, not one word less, not one word more. Somehow survives, almost like something that the gravel, the rocks, the underneath of the topsoil, something that can hide itself, survive the generations, and bloom again if told well. So there's a long spiral here. Excuse me if the logic doesn't go, but we are looking for something that might be a way of making a new start, starting with recognizing we've gone wrong, and where we've gone wrong, and how our language is a language of efficiency, administration, and productivity, and bring it back to a language of what? The missing thing. What would we discover if we looked at ancient cultures who've been living in the same place for a long time, in good relationship, in holy relationship, in a mutual relationship, the hunter-gatherer world, or perhaps even if it had been translated into the farming world, maybe a little bit. How did those people speak? What kind of way did they find to stay in holy relationship with what they're eating, what they're taking from nature, with the trees, with the forest, with the desert, with the plants and animals, with whatever it is that their civilization, their culture is based upon? And what you'll find is a beautiful speech, a storytelling tradition, and a reverence for every time something is taken from nature. And among those ancient peoples all over the world who've not been damaged by our culture, the one culture that does not do this, pretty much. I mean, you might find some other cultures that aren't so cool, but you find nearly all of them with beautiful cradles, beautiful spears, beautiful boots, beautiful tents, beautiful houses, a beautiful way of talking to their forest or to their clouds or to the waves of the ocean, to the fish or the animals, whatever it is that they follow or hunt, whatever it is that their culture depends upon. Speaking across the species line with reverence, with a clarity, and bringing young people, bringing children into that holy relationship where we are not separate, with the impossibility built into real, proper, natural cultures, the impossibility of trashing the world. You'll find it everywhere we look. Now, maybe not, highlighted in some places more than others. The further back you go, the more of that there is. I was at a Real Wilding conference last weekend, and I was asked to tell a story, and suggested I tell the story about the woman who marries a bear, which comes from that very old root somewhere in Northwest America. But it's found everywhere where people and bears live together. Bears collect the same berries, collect the salmon, hunt the salmon the same way. They're kind of in the same game, they live in the same world. And that story, or a version of that story, is found everywhere where people and bears live together, doing the same kind of thing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We can't go back there, but the story has managed to survive in one or another form. And we can bring us back into what it was like to live in holy alignment. It's about a girl who marries a bear. It's about a time when people and the animals were together. People could marry each other. Seals and the men who hunted seals could have love affairs and get married and live together. And all kinds of things went wrong or right. People could marry animals. Those ancient stories have that connection. In our own European tradition, we still have something. If you go back through the Arthurian layers and go back and seek for the hunter-gatherer ancient time in Europe, at the very dawn of civilization in Europe, you can find stories that have come down to us in the form of the Celtic hunting tales, in particular the Finn McCool stories, which we've made as part of our own little civilization here at Spirit Horse, where a bunch of blokes are running through the forest, chasing the wild boar or chasing the wild deer. And of course, every now and again, the wild boar leads them to a feast in the middle of the night, where you go through the species barrier. You enter into another world, the other world that we always have to share, where it's possible to speak to other animals, where you go across the boundary. It's not enough to live in one world that's made of hard facts and figures and efficiencies. There has always to be another world where you can connect through the holy, where you can talk to animals, or where you can travel and find yourself in the other world. And that is where holiness or connection and wild adventure can be found. In the Finn McCool tales, they go back to guys who are running around in the forest, and the deer take them to their wives, or the deer transform into women. And you can see this in the ancient cave paintings, where a line is drawn between the deer and the hunter, a line from belly to belly. So the sense of connection. So we pause for a minute. There's a brief history of culture where things have gone a little bit wrong, where we have to ask questions and then bring it back to language. The language of those stories has some mysterious thing built into it. And I find it impossible when the truth of those stories takes over, when the story is prompting a storyteller to tell it, when it's being listened to by people whose souls and ears are hungry to hear it. There's a mysterious tear that comes. When that mysterious tear starts to fall, and you know truth is being spoken somewhere, and then across thousands of years can come the blessing capacity of that story, the blessing capacity that of being able to mingle with another time and another place. And there's something that comes through which cannot be got through studying literature or can't be got from modern literature, where a being, the personality of the inner world, the soul of the bear or the deer or the ancient forest or the holy, whatever it is that's behind all of that, the supreme intelligence, the that which is in nature, which has to be revered, which is our mother, which we were born from, which gave birth to us with all these thousands of intelligence that are way beyond the human. Across the species, there's some connection. There's the secret love. Even if it's a hunting story, even if we're killing each other, there's the secret reverence and the secret participation in a kind of communion that ancient societies knew and that ours has lost. To find where we've gone wrong and to feel it, not to know the facts, not to know how many years it was since the last dolphin swam in the Yangtze River, not necessarily to know that 99% of the vultures or sharks disappeared from the forest, from the ocean, but to be able to feel nature, eye that can see nature, heart that can feel nature, and a boldness that dares to follow it, to find a way to return to nature. It would mean stepping outside of the current modules of thinking. It would mean abandoning efficiency. It would mean going beyond the facts and figures and going directly to nature, as some of us have, to speak directly to the mountain and the clouds and the elements and ask to be given and shown what is most essential, what is most needed. For my own journey, it was find a way to say the words like we used to say them long, long before. Find a way that when the moment comes, if it comes, and as you will probably have to create the moment yourself, but when the moment comes where a blessing word can be said, from an elder to a youth, from a man to a woman, from women to men, when the feminine has arrayed herself in beauty and has come in all quietude, in the silence of the night, deep inside ritual space, deep inside 4, 5, 6 days set aside only for reverence, only for blessing, only for praising what is. When she comes and takes her seat, when she is arrayed and dressed, when she is welcomed, when she is pacified, when offerings have been made, then the male speaks to her, to know what to say in those moments, to know the words that will create the forgiveness, the peacefulness, the silence, the praise, the blessing, that something will flower and something will begin to happen. Or to know what to say when their young guys also come to sit by the fire, and to be able to go through their armor and quickly say something before a moment is lost that will go into a soul that has been waiting to hear something for 20 years, 30 years, or maybe 2,000 years. Many times at the beginning of our rituals, I'll tell people, your journey has been a few thousand years waiting to arrive at this moment because you're looking for a speech that has not been spoken. Part of your soul has to be addressed. And I give them a fair warning, but then you have to wait for a magic moment when the intellectual armor, when the anger, the armor that we've made in our in the difficulty of our upbringing and our unblessed childhood and unblessed adolescence and unblessed adulthood, when that armor has a chink in it somewhere. And the place to do this is inside a ritual. And all the old people, all those old cultures that I was alluding to, that are not part of this one small dominant misculture that is now destroying things, all of those cultures would have had one thing that we don't have, and that is a hugely inefficient period of time lasting hours or days or sometimes months as part of their annual cycle. Set aside for something called ritual, where nothing is produced that's necessary for survival. There's no productivity, but it's set aside to speak in between the worlds for praising the gods of air or oxygen or water or the fish or the animal, wherever it is that they live, the horns of the animals that they live with, or the milk that comes from the grass they live upon, or something, where a connection is made beyond the species into the non-human. Here at Spirit Horse, we managed somehow or other to create a culture that went from 20 people camping out together for a week in 3 teepees, which was not a bad start, to finding a spiritual home of 200 acres, almost solely based upon giving 4 or 5 days at a time. Sometimes we start with 10 days. 10 days of ritual given over to story in the evenings and to praising the world in the morning, and to learn to speak. And what is human speech for? Let's rush into there in case I'm running out of time. The world is full of ideas and information, and these days an information overload, avalanches after avalanches, but not many times are there words coming from a human mouth directed to the great intelligence of Earth herself, and praising the mist in the morning, praising the rising clouds over the forest, praising the sound of the water, praising the thousand diverse interactions that are going on. Words that come from silence, that are connected to the root, the branch, the flower, and the blossom, and the fruit of the world. Words that can speak the love that we originally felt and that was betrayed in our culture as children or as young people growing up. Words that were not there when we were moving from childhood into becoming men or women, the young men and young women with their sexuality blossoming at the same time as an intense spirituality. Most of that is inoculated out of us in our culture. But at that precise moment, when it first comes, when it's soft and yielding and unsure, and when it sends shivers through the body, those are when a praising hand or a praising word could have done something. Our culture struggles by and heaves by and murders on without that blessing. There isn't a pause. There isn't a place given to holiness. There's a place given to efficiency and productivity. There's a place given to be part of the machine and be successful and have status symbols and so forth. When the holy, the truly natural people is not blessed, then the world must fall apart. People have grown powerful and they're an unblessed population. I've not heard words spoken in a way, and there is no education for it. The language for it has been lost. It's not spoken anymore. And even if it was, and even if we could create it, and even if we ran a few workshops on it for 20 years in a row, every September or every December, still I know, where would the occasion be to speak those words? Where would be the time for those words between men and women, those words between elders and the young, those words between the non-human world and the human? Where would be the place for those to be spoken? Where would be the place where that reverberation would go through the world, through the leaves, over the waters? Where would be the sensitivity and the time and the leisure for us to again to be able to take language from the tips of the waves, like the ancient Celtic bards were said to have? Where would it be that we could learn from listening to trees? Where would that time and place be? So there's no easy answer here. I've for many years really longed to create a culture where this way of blessing, this finding the language and the words, which is all about spells, by the way, and all the druidic things we hear about. We know that there were ancient people who could speak in a way that would make things happen. We know that Finn McCool could end an argument with 3 sentences, according to the stories. But there's no place for it. A home has not been made for it. And here I'm not exactly sure if we've succeeded or failed, but there's been at least a community of people grown together and knitted together and fell apart and argued about it, but at least they cared about the same thing over 20 or 30 years, where time is set aside. Say, oh, we need to do more ritual. Where time is set aside, where something magical, straight from the spirit, can be said. Often erupting like a sudden flood or a sudden spring, straight from some natural source. You create the field, and then somehow or other somebody says something that's true and beautiful and always, and maybe costs them something. And suddenly you can trust that person, and you can trust all the people who heard it, and you can trust all the people who were listening, who were there at that time, who were part of the circle, who were sitting around the fire at that time. Suddenly something has happened that is exquisitely beautiful, produced nothing, doesn't help people get on with their ordinary lives, doesn't help them pay the mortgage, doesn't help them, keep going with the culture we've got right now, but somehow makes up for 2,000 or 3,000 years of neglect. Something that comes from truth, something that comes straight from what is natural and essentially part of human nature, that isn't educated. So it's not some taught thing, and it's not a quote, and it's not a Rumi poem, which is not a bad place to start, but there's the magical wildness or craziness that each individual has if they learn. And this is not about shamanism. If they've learned through their own vision quest, or through their own rebellion, or through their own craziness, to follow it and go with it and take it to the end, then they can speak a small fraction of the many faces of a truth that makes a community whole or makes a community real. And it's not about non-violent communication or democratic votes, or it's about coming straight from the spirit, being of the spirit, letting it come from the spirit, and letting the spirit move through you. So that what's your plan going to be, and what's your business plan, and how's it all going to work out, don't know. The spirit speaks through and makes you move, makes you make a decision, makes you say something that cracks the world open. All of a sudden, the magnificence of the great intelligence of which we are a tiny flower or branch can suddenly be felt. And it's at that moment, the words, no matter who said it, will be accepted and be taken as a kind of milk that feeds the community, and people will remember it later, and maybe out of proper courtesy and proper politeness, not even repeat it or quote it, or oh, look what John said earlier on. It's just known that we went through the holy door, we entered into connection, and the people were there, and the fire was praised, and the flame of the fire, and the smoke, and the scent of it in our nose, and the earth we were sitting on, and all the stars were called into the medicine lodge at that time, and something holy was said that came from the love of living, and the intelligence that we all belong to. And it's not an I think, or here are my ideas, or here's my presentation, but rather a moment of renewing, a moment of bathing in a cauldron. And people say, well, can you teach that speech? And say, yeah, have a go, but it never worked out. We can't have, let's have ritual speech or beautiful speech over here. It has to be, here's culture, here's story, here's how we make our baskets, here's how we make our houses, here's how we relate to the water, or here's how we grow our crops, whatever. The whole immense thing has, it's all connected. And so we can't have a little university course over here just about that. We have to have a course in living in real culture, or living in natural culture, or being part of something that covers everything, which means knowing something about how the world works and how we relate it, knowing something especially about food, water, where we come from, where our bodies come from, the explosion of stars, and how supernovas had to explode so that gold was made, which is contained in the human body, and having a sense of that magnificent, huge consciousness, which is our parents. I have no parents. I make the heavens and earth my parents. And something like that is put succinctly, it's remembered for 800 years in that case, or 600. We're running short of time. Right. And finding that. Oh, sorry. I'm messing up the microphone. What's left in my ear? Finding a way back that maybe is informed by Rumi, and maybe is informed by 100 different literary sources or translations from various languages that are usually languages of cultures that are about to disappear. Those can all be streams that pour in, but it won't be easily found. And then will there be time made for it? Will there be space for it? Is there a way of life that we could develop? Is there a time put aside when such speech could happen? And would such speech being spoken make time, make place, make a ground, a field where these things could happen, where something different could happen, where the world could be praised, not an exchange of information, where a life of the spirit could be enjoined, blessed, hoped for, encouraged. Those are the questions that arose out of 30 years of Spirit Horse. Another 30 years plus 3 more plus times 10, we might begin to have the beginning of something, which means to bring us back to the place I started, that we have to admit that what we are doing at the moment is participating in an enormous failure. And there's nothing wrong with going to there. An enormous failure, and if we could feel it enough, there would be the first wave of tears about what we have lost and how to learn to weep those tears. And if we could do it together, there would be community. And if there was words spoken from that place of deep loss, cultural loss, individual loss, loss of childhood, loss of adolescence, loss of eldership, loss of time where we can be together in the holy way. If there were those tears wept, then maybe we would speak through a tightened throat, through the grief of it, through the brokenness of it. Something real would be spoken that has nothing to do with success, nothing to do with our status symbols or how well we're coping or what we've managed to pull off in the world, but rather speaking from our loneliness, which could be our aloneness, from our not fitting in, which could be our wildest, most beautiful natural card, and what I refer to as the holy Cinderella in everybody, one who's not part of society, because she never can be, because she can never be one of those ugly sisters. She can never be socially so adroit. She can never worm her way into some, or invidiate herself in some way. She remains natural. And the real natural is not part of human community, not part of human society, which is so caught up in status and so caught up in impressing other people. Her simplicity, her beauty is innate, majestic, intelligent royalty and holiness. And if that part of a person could be encouraged, and that part, then we'd have the beginning of something. But that part of you and me was told to go away, usually around age 5, when you enter the school gates. You're not welcome. You're here, you will learn to fit in. You will learn to sit at your desk or stand in straight lines and do what other human beings do and think the same thoughts. And any wild thing that doesn't fit into that will run away somewhere to weep in the nearest thicket. At Spirit Horse, I've tried to speak to that one who's usually still age 5, who's told to go away and that you're not part of this. That wild one that just wants to play in the dust or loves to put her toes in the water, or who doesn't really fit into the world of busy, angry adults, that needs huge space, sunshine space, flowery space, and wild, rocky space, wave-filled, night star place to dream, and grow, and fall in love with the world, rather than put through a machine to be turned into a modern adult capable of destroying the world and sounding efficient while you're at it. Happy to answer questions if I haven't done you all in with that one.
Thanks, Shiv. Thank you. Whew. That was a lot. that was a very full 40 minutes. And we've got Alistair coming forward with a question. Alistair, if you want to pull yourself off mute.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Shivam, for giving us your time and your presence here this afternoon. It's beautiful, beautiful talk. I have a question around, Matthew gave us some homework around looking for stories in the last 3 or 4 generations of our family. And I'm particularly disconnected from mine beyond my parents. So my mother's side seem to have a lot of, seem to have been successful business people and, steadfast churchgoers. But as is the problem with really nice people, there doesn't seem to be a great deal in the way of juicy stories in there. But when I spoke to some of my father's relatives, my grandfather apparently served in the war, and there's a rumor that he deserted. And when I heard that, I had a little tingle, and I felt there was some truth in there that I needed to dig into and try and find more of. So my question is, how do I go from, I've got one fact and a rumor on a sheet of paper at the moment. How do I go from that to weaving a story? I mean, obviously I've got more research to do, but beyond journeying and trying to walk the land he did and feel that grass beneath my toes, same as he did, how can I spin that out? You know, can you give me some pointers towards the truth, how I can get to the truth with that?
You're looking for the real ancestor, and we all are. We're looking for the ancestor that we wanna be the grandchild of, and you might have to go back a long way. Like we've just been saying, that the generation before us was broken, the generation before that was broken, the generation before that. You get through many ways of that, being caught up in armies, either, you know, doing the perpetrating and conquering, or being conquered and having to, you know, survive somehow or other, or flee or escape or something. So it would be great to think we could go back a generation or two and then find that source of blessing, because that's what you're looking for in a way. It's like, where in my spine, where in my genes is there that blessing? Well, what you probably will find, most of us, many of us will have to find, and there's a grief in that, a loss in that, but what can we do? Is like mine, of parents that left behind a kind of a paradise, but it was a very hard paradise to move to an industrial city in England to get by. And so many other people from all over Europe, thrown around by the world wars, endless, endless things to grieve over. There are those statues in every town in the UK, pretty much a list of people who died at the age of 20 or whatever in mud somewhere, fighting for a freedom that I would love to think we have, and that we were enjoying, and we could somehow celebrate those men who died in muck and the women who wept over them and so forth. But okay, so you have that, you're searching for something where that has a power of blessing in it, that has an ancestor that really did what they thought was right. Be that ancestor. You be someone that lives true to what you really believe, not what the neighbors think or the government's telling you to do or any other. Find out, go to nature, go to the holy. How should I be living so that your grandchildren will say, well, we came from him. So you might have to go back a long way. What we do here is a ritual. I'm going to give a little bit of the lowdown here in case you never make it down here. So walk backwards in the nighttime, an hour after twilight, one step at a time, and speak the words grandfather, 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 stepping back each time, going back one step, back into your spine, back to the source of things. You might have to go back 30,000 years. Stay sensitive, stay quiet, stay prayerful until you hit something, a node in the ancestry. Or a woman, grandmother, 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 grandmother. Very soon you will run out of any ideas or any scraps of information you may manage to, dig up from somewhere or another. Very soon you'll be in the unknown territory. Going back through one line, there are thousands of them, but going back through one ancestral line, because we just can't hold it all. It's too big, too vast. We're all related to each other. There is no ancestral line as such. There's ancestral branchings that are just like the trunk of a tree that goes, starts out with 1, then it's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Before you know it, we're all related to each other, pretty much, regardless of race and color and so forth. So go back there looking for that place. Somewhere there's a node there. Somewhere there's an ancestor who lived really well. And that ancestor may have known that boys and girls, men and women, would be descended from him or her and have lived with that knowledge. So not to live with a short view, but to live with like, people will descend from me, and people will descend from my friends, and people will descend from my extended family, whoever we are. And to let that pride that we would all, that blessing feeling, that sense of honor and goodness ripple down through the genes. Unfortunately, and we have to be real about it, it's often much, much more messy than that. And even now we do not live in that way. There's all the short-term gain. There's all the getting by. There's all the, I don't care about anybody else. I've had enough. There's the anger, the resentment, frustration, the fear, and all the difficult emotions. But to rise above that and to be descended somewhere in the line, there's someone who really lived it, who really lived the adventure, whose genes carry that, and those are the genes you're looking for and you're searching for. And I imagine that's why Matthew gave you that awkward piece of homework, or maybe just gave it to you so you'd have to face up to the frustrations and despairs. And honor all the failures. Failure, difficulty. Your parents and your parents' parents and your parents' parents, whether they were doing good stuff or bad stuff, we're all struggling. That struggle has to be somehow or other praised and accepted, no matter what it was, no matter what horrible things they did or what horrible things were done to them. To put it to peace, to allow it to somehow or other be acknowledged and fed. Many people lived and died without being forgiven for what they did, without being praised for what they did. Send that message back through the ancestral line, and then yourself become a good grandfather or great-grandfather. That's all I'd like to say on that.
Good word, Shiv. Thank you. We have a question coming from Matthew Williams, and he hasn't arrived at Spirit Horse yet, but it's highly likely that Matthew will spend much time at Spirit Horse in the coming years. Yes, this is a face you'll probably get to know quite well. Matthew.
The kid that needs huge space to dream, to grow, and to fall in love with the earth. Really got me on that one. You really got me on that one. I think that was one of the last things that you spoke. I just wanted to presence that. My question is, you speak of holy relationship with the earth, but how do we stay in holy relationship with ourselves?
You kind of put your finger on it there. The magic and innocence, whether it was a broken childhood or the nightmare of childhood, or whether you actually had a blessed childhood, pretty rare. There's the innocent magic there. There's essential goodness. There is such a thing as the holy child. There's such a thing as the unformed child who had all the natural intelligences brimming in them, and then along come the adults with their very troubled world, who usually want to initiate the child into their troubles, so they can grow up and be as miserable as them. That little child must always be forgiven, must always be picked up and loved, must always be honored for the secret, majestic, vulnerable, warm, beautiful flower. What's the word? Not a flower, but something that has a possibility to flower in it. That little child has to be always part of who you are and what you do, no matter how warlike and adult you have to become, or however you may have to grow your armor, or as I heard it lately, however gladiatorial you have to become in life. I think that would be one thing. That's there's a secret to a purity, a line to purity that we all have. And then whatever rituals I'm doing, or whatever kind of process people are going through with us, I try and keep that route open, try and keep that line open. It's kind of beyond therapy or healing or something like that, but that if you have, and most of us have somehow been taught or educated to throw away that childhood, the innocence of it, the naivety of it, the vulnerability of it, and you want to be strong or knowledgeable or efficient or some other thing. That to keep the line open and return through maybe clear memory, or just through some line of light, to that innocent young person that once just looked with unfiltered at the majesty of the world and saw it, and you could see the auras of trees and so forth. You could feel the grass growing. that'll be one example of not buying into this culture, but opening to a place that's far more vulnerable, delicate, sensitive, and not to throw away that side of you, and not to be so caught up in our modern world that there isn't time and space given to that, to be quiet enough to connect with those things, and to accept our own woundedness, and to accept that once we were those vulnerable people, and to bring that into adulthood. Not an adult who's strong, not an adult who knows themselves really well, kind of thing, but an adult who's sensitive, who can be hurt, can feel things, and who can be, this whole day can be changed by a few notes from a song, or a glimpse of, birds feeding in the trees or something, where we're sensitive and we're not rushing headlong towards efficiency. As well as having to be an adult and do what you got to do and deal with stuff. I don't know if I got answered your question or not, but anyway, that's what sprang to mind.
Mate, perhaps time for one more. Susie, if you'd like to. Did you have a question, Suze? No, that's a strong no. What we might do then, Benjamin? No? Okay, we're good. It's been quite full, Shiv. Maybe what we might do is open the space to have a little bit of a conversation about what's ahead at Spirit Horse over the next couple of months, and especially perhaps Beautiful Speech. Did you want to share a little bit about Beautiful Speech and the journey there in September?
Yeah, okay. So you're asking at the right time, as we're kind of in the middle of summer. So for one reason or another, mostly practical, we do line up quite a few things for August and September. So what's happening is, at the moment we're just building as usual, making the camp beautiful, but getting ready for the self-inquiry, which is like we call Enlightenment Intensive, which is this worldwide workshop where people can go really deeply, ruthlessly, in a very unflowery, very Zen-like deep way into who am I, what is this? Going straight to spirit, which means going straight to looking at your own being, and spending 3 days with absolute dedication and intensity and devotion, just looking for the answer in yourself, in your own being. Who am I? What is this I? And then relaxing for a few days after that intensity, and learning maybe to speak to each other and be with each other from a very open, and usually what turns out to be relaxed and released and profound place. And suddenly you again can feel the grass growing. You again can feel the majesty of water pouring over rocks without having to rush off anywhere else. Okay, that's Enlightenment Intensive. We give ourselves a whole 1 day break before we launch this thing called Sacred Man and Woman, which is the only thing at the moment that we're doing that allows people to spend 5 days deep inside ritual space. And just to make it fun, the men do their ritual space, the women do their ritual space, and only when we think we've made a bit of progress on the individual separation. I know that maybe this might be not totally politically correct these days, but anyway, men in the male space, women in the female space, sitting in a place of holiness, talking to that fire, nourishing that fire, feeding that fire with every kind of story and oil and incense and presence and prayer, and then meeting, seeing what comes out afterwards, what kind of crazy primal indicator we get upon first sight of women together and then woman alone, or man together and then men alone, welcoming each other in a holy and good way, in a way that can only work towards slowly and gradually, and can only be done in ritual space, not through ideas, not through discussion, not through not through sorting out anything, not even through healing or therapy, but through ritual, through the praising of what is with our bodies and hearts and minds and speech. Okay, that leads us into, like, speech is very much a part of that. People having to learn the ritual speech for a certain way of talking between men and women to take place, a certain super refined, courteous way of speaking to for one soul to another, and those souls to the whole big holy picture. And that often leaves us a little bit short, in that not many people know how to do it. They learn and move towards it, But arising out of those kind of workshops where we're involved in that ritual space deeply over a period of days has come like also questions, well, what do you say and how do you do that? And what are the words? That sounds really good, but what did you just say? And I want to be able to say that, but I forgot what you just said. And became the idea of, could we teach the ritual speech? So, which I sometimes call beautiful speech, because people know, well, ritual, what's that? So again, go back to that talk I was giving just now. We're trying to give about how ritual time and the speech that's part of it is a necessary missing ingredient in the creation of true culture, or real culture, or natural culture, beautiful culture, or culture that might rescue us. So I've tried in the depths of winter quite often, but this time I moved it forward to September, so it's still nice and warm in this Welsh Valley of ours, where people can actually do a little kind of miniature university course for 4 days, 3 or 4 days, in the ritual speech, the praising speech, the beautiful speech, the speech that has been lost, the way of talking that can make you want to live, the way of talking that has a power of blessing in it, or power of praising in it, and it's not an information speak, and it uses Anglo-Saxon English. It's not the language of concept. It's the language that brings us closer to what is, and allows us to hopefully address something more soulful and wild and hidden and bruised and wounded and not sure of itself in each of us. There's the part of us that's been thrown away, so that part can come back, play its hand in the fight, in the beautiful fight, and in the recovery maybe of how to be real people living in a real culture, in a real world. No promises about any of those last 3 things, but to be moving in that direction that is in our nature brings not necessarily a happiness, just brings a creativity that's irresistible. So that is on offer if anyone would like to listen to me talking like this for 3 days, God help you. But it's a place where so many ideas can be explored, even just in one word. What are we going to say at mealtime? Or what are we going to say at the opening of the ritual? How are you going to welcome people? Say, who are you welcoming? Which part of them are you welcoming? Which part needs welcoming most? And just find the language of the soul, how we can move deeper and deeper and deeper towards addressing each other on a deep level. And those sort of things are entirely lost, those ancient courtesies and those ancient blessings and those ancient ways of making connections. So it's just to have a go at that. And we're not going to sort it out in one weekend. No one's going to get a certificate, but it's the place where all the lost and the ideas and the wild cards come on the table. So I kind of like it. And there is an invitation to anyone who wants to try it.
Thank you so much, Shiv. Just noticing the sheep arriving as we come to the end here.
Right, now surrounded by 1,000 sheep and our rewilding program down here. We're on the wrong side of the fence for this one.
I wanted to share before we wrap this up that for me last year, the Enlightenment Intensive and Sacred Man, Sacred Woman and Cauldron of Plenty were quite significant journeys for me in my remembering. And I really invite anyone who has the capacity to or feels the call to know that you can trust those spaces and those journeys as important pieces. And yeah, it's been really in service to me. Shivam, thank you so much for your and beautiful speech. I haven't done yet. I'm not going to be here because I'll be in Australia, Shiv. And I really wanted to do it, but you moved it 1 month after, but that's okay. I'm highly encouraging everyone to go to Beautiful Speech and tell me all about it. Any last comments, mate?
No, thanks for the space, Matthew. And yeah, you had quite a ride here with us last year. You've done enough for 1 year. And hopefully, life will give us a few more years to catch up here and there with things. So sorry if I bullied all your students there and harangued them too much, but thanks for the space and nice to have a chance to talk about these offbeat but necessary subjects. And salute to all your listeners. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shiv. We're really, really grateful.